I had barely settled into my hotel room, exhausted and ready to crash, when my phone buzzed. It was my boss, calling with one of those last-minute demands that couldn't be ignored. She needed me back at the office by 8 a.m., no exceptions. I sighed, realizing my night was about to become a lot more complicated. I'd need to pack up, book a last-minute flight, and hustle to the airport. At this hour, calling Melissa would only wake up the kids, so I figured I'd just head home quietly, grab what I needed, and leave again without disturbing anyone. When I finally reached the house, it was dark except for the faint glow coming from our bedroom window. I slipped in, moving quietly through the hallway, but stopped short when I heard voices, Melissa's and another man's. In that instant, a cold weight settled in my gut, twisting into something ugly. The kids weren't home, they must have been staying with her sister. All the signs I'd missed or ignored started to fall into place. Melissa was having an affair. My grandfather's old advice echoed in my mind, urging me to stay calm, to keep a steady head. He used to tell me that acting out of anger could destroy everything, a lesson he'd driven into me since I was young. I closed my eyes, took a few steadying breaths, and clamped down on the urge to storm into that room. I'd get the proof I needed, but I wouldn't let her drag me down to her level. From the shadows, I pulled out the work-issued smartphone my company had given me, complete with a clear camera and a microphone. I began recording, capturing the moment that would unravel my world. Seeing her with another man cut me deeply, but I swallowed that pain, forcing myself to focus. My thoughts raced. If Melissa could betray me like this, what else might she have lied about? I'd need to get a paternity test for the kids. The thought hurt, but I couldn't leave any questions unanswered now. As I continued recording, I overheard something that shattered my restraint. Something so cold, so casually heartless, that I couldn't hold back anymore. In a flash, I was through the door, charging at the man, Ryan, I'd later learn his name was. My fists flew, each punch fueled by betrayal and anger. Ryan managed to escape the house, looking half-beaten, and Melissa shrank into a corner, trembling. "Get over here," I ordered, my voice barely recognizable. The scene felt surreal, as if I were watching someone else live out this nightmare. My temper, something I'd always struggled to control, had completely taken over, and for a moment, I almost blacked out, unable to recall every detail of what had just happened. I repeated, "Get over here," until she finally crawled closer, fear stark in her eyes. "I'm sorry, Ethan. I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice shaking. But her apology only fueled my anger. "Spare me the apologies, Melissa," I spat back, my voice laced with contempt. "What about all the other times with Ryan? Do you regret those too?" Her face paled, her eyes darting away, but she didn't answer. For the first time in years, she looked scared of me. And it felt odd. Powerful even, if I'm being honest. "Please," she stammered, "don't hurt me. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I could barely look at her, my disgust spilling over. "You've disgraced this house, our bedroom, our bed. You betrayed not just me but our children." Melissa's shoulders shook as she shrank in on herself, her lips quivering. I forced myself to take a few calming breaths, feeling the anger simmer down, though not entirely gone. In that moment, I knew I was done with her. No more lies, no more chances. "You'll pack up and be out of here by noon," I told her coldly, nodding toward the bed. "Take everything from this room, especially that bed. Leave anything that's mine alone, got it?" Barely above a whisper, she managed a "how am I supposed to," but I cut her off with a growl. "Figure it out. Maybe call one of those brothers of yours, the same ones I've lent money to." I wasn't giving her an inch. As she nodded, curling up on the floor, I walked out, grabbing my bags and shoving them into my car. I took one last look in the mirror before leaving, noticing my busted nose and blood-stained shirt. The whole situation felt surreal, like something out of a bad dream. Ignoring the pain, I drove straight to the hospital. The doctor's assessment wasn't pretty: broken nose, a couple of cracked ribs, and a possible concussion. When the police arrived to ask what had happened, I downplayed everything, saying I'd been attacked but couldn't remember much. The truth was, at that moment, I didn't care. All I wanted was to put Melissa behind me, to get back to my life, and start figuring out how to protect my kids from the fallout of this mess. When I finally got out of the hospital and made it back to work, I knew I'd have to face my boss, Claire, looking every bit like the man who'd lost a fight, and maybe a bit more than that. I managed to clean up a little in her private bathroom, but when I looked in the mirror, all I could see was a man who just watched his life fall apart. As I stepped out, Claire glanced up and gave me one of those sympathetic, no-nonsense looks she'd perfected over the years. She was one of the few people I could talk to openly, and when she asked, "What happened, Ethan?" I told her, with the edges sanded off. "Came home last night to a surprise I'd rather not have had," I said simply. Claire didn't push, just listened, her face shifting from understanding to something sterner. "Well, you'll need some backup on this one. I know a good divorce lawyer, my college friend, Megan. Let me make a call." After a quick conversation, Claire turned to me and said, "She's free this morning. Go see her, Ethan. You're going to need solid advice and support to get through this." I didn't argue. Megan met with me not long after, and I explained everything in raw, matter-of-fact detail. I kept it to the facts, mostly, leaving out any mention of my rage. She looked at me with concern but didn't pry, just listened. When I showed her the recording I'd made, her eyes widened, especially at the part where Ryan asked Melissa, "Am I more important to you than your kids?" and she answered without hesitation, "I'm yours. I don't care about them." Megan shook her head. "Ethan, that video is strong evidence, but it's not a guaranteed win for full custody. She could claim she was just speaking in the heat of the moment. But I was determined. I want full custody, Megan. I don't want Melissa to have control over them, not even for a minute." She sighed, nodding with understanding. "I'll fight for it, Ethan, but be prepared. This will be an uphill battle, even with the video." Megan then handed me a stack of paperwork and began drafting the initial documents. She reminded me to keep my temper in check. "Stay calm, Ethan," she said firmly. "Don't give Melissa any reason to make you look bad in court." I gave a heavy nod, feeling a mixture of relief and anger. As I left Megan's office, I couldn't help but think of the kids, Hope and Luke, and the life they'd already had to endure, staying with Melissa's family or grandparents while she was out. She'd pulled the wool over my eyes for years, and now, I had to be the one to keep everything from crashing down on them. As I got back to the office, Claire noticed the look on my face. "You need some time off, Ethan?" she asked gently, as if she knew I was unraveling just under the surface. I didn't want her pity, but the kindness helped. "Maybe just an hour," I muttered, glancing at the clock. "I've got a few things to handle at home." "Take whatever time you need," she replied, and I could hear the understanding in her voice. When I got home, there was already a moving truck in the driveway. Melissa's brothers were hauling out the bed and a few other pieces, her brothers giving me wary looks. 2 police cars were also parked out front, with a couple of officers watching. I took a deep breath, grabbed my laptop, and cautiously approached them. "I have a recording that might clear some things up about last night. Would you like to see it?" One of the officers, a tough-looking woman who introduced herself as Sergeant Jessica Young, glanced at me. "You Ethan Parker? Melissa's husband?" "Yes, Sergeant. I'm here to answer any questions, but please, let me show you the recording first." She gave me a nod, though she looked ready to step in if things went south. As we played the video, I watched Melissa's reaction. She stumbled a bit, dropping a box she'd been carrying, her face paling as my words replayed in the open air. That's when I noticed a small plastic bag of white powder slip out from one of her boxes. "Sergeant, you might want to check that out," I said, pointing to it. Jessica moved quickly, radioing in backup as she called Melissa over and started questioning her. Melissa's brothers looked on in stunned silence, and then I heard the words I'd been half expecting but never wanted to hear: "Your wife is under arrest for possession of a controlled substance. It'll be confirmed through testing, but it looks like she's been using." My heart twisted as I watched her get handcuffed, but my mind immediately went to the kids. "What about my children, Sergeant?" I asked, my voice barely steady. "They're with her parents, about 5 miles from here." The sergeant's gaze softened, and she looked at me with something approaching sympathy. "If I were you, Mr. Parker, I'd go get them right now. With your wife in custody, you have the right." As I turned to leave, a mix of relief and anger washed over me. Finally, I was taking control of the situation for my kids' sake. But the weight of what Melissa had done, of what she'd turned our family into, was just beginning to hit. Driving to Melissa's parents' house felt like stepping into enemy territory. Melissa's family had never liked me, thought I was too soft, too accommodating, like my kindness was a flaw. I pulled into their driveway and forced myself to take a deep breath. Whatever feelings I had to set them aside for Hope and Luke. I was their only anchor in this storm. When I knocked, my in-laws' expressions ranged from surprise to outright hostility. I could see them weighing their options, probably trying to guess what Melissa had told me. I went straight to the point. "I'm here to pick up my kids," I said, keeping my tone firm. "They'll be staying with me from now on." For a moment, I thought they'd argue, but they didn't put up much of a fight. Melissa's mother crossed her arms, watching me with a look that bordered on pity. I could see the unspoken judgment in her eyes, but I ignored it. There was no need for their approval or sympathy. They knew what Melissa had done, and I suspected they were as tired of covering for her as I was of being lied to. The kids ran to me, their faces lighting up when they saw I'd come to get them. Hope, my 5-year-old, threw her arms around me and asked, "Daddy, can we go home now?" Her voice was small, a little unsure, like she'd been wondering when she'd see me again. My heart broke a little, realizing how many nights they must have spent in this house while I was out working late, thinking everything was fine at home. On our way to the car, Hope tugged on my hand, glancing at the patrol car parked outside. "Daddy, is that a real police car?" she asked, her eyes wide with excitement. "Yes, sweetheart, it is," I said, trying to sound light-hearted. "The officer's name is Aunt Jessica. She helped Daddy with something important, and she's going to make sure we all get home safe." As we buckled in, Jessica came over to say hello to the kids. She had a warm smile, the kind that put even Hope at ease right away. "Hi there," she said softly, crouching down to their eye level. "I'll be following along to make sure you're all safe, okay?" Hope looked at her with awe. "Aunt Jessica, will you come to our house?" she asked, eyes gleaming with anticipation. Jessica's expression softened even more. "Maybe another time, sweetheart. But I'll keep an eye on things for now." The whole drive back was quiet, a contrast to the normal chatter I used to hear from the back seat. I glanced at them in the rearview mirror and saw the worry in their little faces. They were too young to understand everything, but they knew things weren't right. "Everything's going to be okay, I promise," I said, not sure who I was trying to reassure more, me or them. When we arrived home, Jessica gave me some advice I hadn't thought of. "Ethan, you might want to file for temporary custody," she said, her voice serious. "And it would be wise to get a restraining order against Melissa, just to keep her away from the kids and the house for now." It was sound advice, and I nodded, trying to process everything that had happened. "Thank you, Jessica," I said, my voice coming out thicker than I intended. I didn't know how I would have handled this day without her steady presence. She waited outside as I brought the kids in, making sure everything was secure before finally leaving. As she drove away, I caught a glimpse of her looking back, her face thoughtful. A part of me wanted to stop her, to invite her inside just for the comfort of another adult who understood. But I had a lot to focus on now, and I couldn't let my guard down. Once we were inside, I knelt down and wrapped both kids in a hug. Mom and Dad had a big argument, so she's going to stay with Grandma and Grandpa for a while, I told them, trying to keep my voice calm. But you're here with me, and that's what matters, okay? Hope, always wise beyond her years, nodded, squeezing my hand. As long as you're here, Daddy, she whispered, we'll be okay. That night, I made sure we were all together, setting up a makeshift bed for the three of us in the guest room. As they drifted off to sleep beside me, I felt a fierce, protective resolve settle in. Whatever it took, I'd protect my kids. We were going to make it through this, together. The morning after bringing the kids home, I was up early, mind racing with everything that had to be done. Melissa was still in custody, but I knew that wouldn't last forever. I needed to get a handle on our finances, protect what was left, and make sure my kids were secure. After tucking them in with a nanny for the day, I headed straight to the bank. First thing I did was transfer most of our joint savings into a personal account in my name only. I canceled every credit card we shared, unwilling to let Melissa spend another dime of our money on her reckless choices. While I was at the bank, I spoke with a manager about securing our valuables in a new safe deposit box, separate from the one Melissa had access to. If she wanted anything from me now, she'd have to fight for it. The realization felt harsh, but I couldn't afford to be sentimental anymore. For too long, I'd trusted her while she chipped away at the foundation of our life together. Back home, I went through every room, tossing out reminders of Melissa's betrayal, clearing the space of her things. It felt good, like I was finally reclaiming my home, piece by piece. I kept Hope and Luke close, trying to act like everything was normal. They were so young, and I didn't want them to be afraid. I cooked them dinner, helped them with a puzzle, and did my best to make them feel safe. Later that day, Megan called with an update on the legal proceedings. Ethan, the temporary custody order went through, she said, her voice steady and confident. And we filed for a restraining order against Melissa, keeping her away from you and the children until we can sort out her charges. Given her recent arrest, the court may lean in your favor for full custody, but I'll be honest, it's still an uphill battle. I breathed a sigh of relief, though a sliver of doubt crept in. Thanks, Megan. I appreciate you handling all of this. Just stay focused, Ethan, she advised. Don't let Melissa provoke you. If she tries to make contact, you don't respond. Let me handle it. Once the call ended, I felt the weight of the situation pressing down on me. My family was fractured beyond repair, my trust was broken, and now I had to rebuild everything, both for myself and for my kids. I tried not to think too far ahead, but my mind kept going back to the uncertainty of it all. That evening, as I tucked the kids into bed, Hope looked up at me with big, searching eyes. Daddy, when is Mommy coming home? I paused, my heart sinking. I'm not sure, sweetheart. But no matter what, I'm here for you. You don't have to worry about a thing. She nodded, satisfied for now, and snuggled into her pillow. I turned off the lights, sat down on the edge of the bed, and watched them sleep for a while. They were my responsibility now, completely and wholly. I couldn't let anything, or anyone, tear us apart again. The next morning, I sent Melissa's things over to her parents' house, making it clear she wasn't welcome back. I wanted her out of our lives for good, but I knew the battle was just beginning. The divorce proceedings loomed ahead, and the possibility of a custody fight kept gnawing at me. That's when I remembered the recording, the one where Melissa had said she didn't care about the kids. That one small sentence was my only advantage. It hurt like hell to use it, but I knew I had to protect them from a mother who'd already abandoned them in every way that counted. With a deep breath, I steeled myself. I would get through this, no matter how long it took or how many battles I'd have to fight. A few days later, I found myself back at work, trying to lose myself in the routine. But the pain from my injuries and the mental weight of everything going on made it difficult to focus. Claire, my boss, noticed right away and pulled me aside. Ethan, "You're not alone in this, okay?" she said gently. "If you need any extra support here, you've got it." Claire had always been someone I could count on. When she offered her support, it felt like the first bit of solid ground I'd found since everything had fallen apart. "Thank you, Claire," I replied, feeling the weight of her words settle over me. She nodded, her expression serious. "There's more than one way to take care of yourself, you know. You don't have to carry everything alone," she said before heading back to her office. I appreciated her words more than she'd ever know. Later that day, as I tried to focus on my work, I spotted Melissa's brother in the lobby, looking worn and anxious. Probably heard about everything, I thought bitterly. He waited there for a long time, watching me like he was debating whether or not to approach. When I finally made eye contact with him, he gave me a slight nod, and I knew I'd have to face him sooner or later. I took a steadying breath and stepped toward him. "What do you need?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. He shifted uncomfortably. "Ethan, I know I don't have a right to ask anything of you. But Melissa's struggling. She's saying she's sorry, that she wants to make things right." My jaw clenched. It's too late for apologies, and she knows it. She made her choices. I didn't want to listen, didn't want to get dragged into his guilt-ridden sympathy act. But then he surprised me. "Look, I know you don't owe her anything. But maybe you can at least let her see the kids, just once. She's desperate." His voice cracked, and I could tell he was torn between loyalty to his sister and an understanding of what she'd done. I looked him straight in the eye, anger simmering just beneath the surface. "I'm doing what's best for my kids. Melissa should have thought about them before she threw it all away." He nodded slowly, his gaze dropping. "I understand. Just, take care of them, okay?" As he left, I felt an odd mix of pity and anger. I knew he was trying to protect his sister, but the damage was already done. The truth was, Melissa had already lost the right to call herself their mother, and no amount of regret would change that. Later, I met with Megan again. She wanted to discuss our approach for the custody hearing, especially now that Melissa's family was hinting at her desire for reconciliation. "Ethan, if she's trying to regain custody or even joint custody, we'll have to be strategic," she warned. "That video is our best asset, but we may need more than that." I knew she was right. Melissa's family could pull every trick in the book to defend her. They had the money and the connections, and they'd do whatever it took to get her back into the kids' lives. "Whatever it takes," I said firmly. "I'm not letting her or her family get any control over my children." Megan nodded, her face set in determination. "Then let's make sure we have a plan that covers every angle. We'll fight this, Ethan." As I walked out of her office, I felt more resolved than ever. Melissa's choices had destroyed our marriage, shattered our family, and left me picking up the pieces. But I was done feeling powerless. I had the right people on my side, and I was ready for the battle ahead. A few weeks later, the court date for our initial custody hearing arrived. I'd barely slept the night before, running through everything Megan and I had prepared. As I entered the courthouse, I spotted Melissa and her parents across the hall, huddled together. She looked a little more worn down than usual, her eyes rimmed with dark circles, but there was a hardness there too, as if she were determined to make me pay. When we entered the courtroom, Melissa's lawyer argued that she deserved joint custody, painting her as a mother who'd made a mistake, but was ready to make amends. I clenched my jaw, feeling a surge of anger. One mistake. That was putting it mildly. What she'd done was a complete betrayal of everything we'd built, everything we'd promised to our kids. Then it was our turn. Megan presented the recording, the video I'd taken that night, playing the part where Melissa dismissed our children for the man she'd been with. "Am I more important to you than your kids?" Ryan had asked, and Melissa's cold response, "I don't care about them," echoed through the courtroom. It was almost like watching it for the first time, that same sharp pain in my chest as I relived that moment. The judge's face hardened as the recording played. He glanced over at Melissa, and her defiant expression faltered. For the first time, I saw her look genuinely rattled, as if she hadn't realized the impact those words would have. Megan continued, explaining Melissa's drug charge and how she'd been arrested with controlled substances in her possession. "This is not just about an affair," Megan said, her voice strong and steady. "It's about a mother who endangered her children, who repeatedly prioritized her own desires over their well-being. Ethan Parker is here because he's committed to providing stability, safety, and love for his children, something Melissa Parker has failed to do." Melissa's lawyer jumped in, claiming she'd only said those words in a moment of emotional distress and was deeply remorseful. He argued that Melissa's family was willing to help her get back on her feet, that she was committed to getting better, and that taking her children away entirely would be too harsh. He even tried to spin the drug charge as a one-time incident, a result of the stress she'd been under. I had to stop myself from scoffing. One-time incident. She'd had a bag of powder hidden in her belongings. And who knew what other secrets she'd been hiding? The judge looked between us, his face unreadable. Then he cleared his throat. "Until a final custody decision is reached, I'm ordering a temporary custody arrangement. Ethan Parker will have primary custody of the children, and Melissa Parker is to have supervised visitation twice a month. These visits will be strictly monitored, and any breach of this arrangement will result in immediate revocation of privileges." A weight lifted from my shoulders, but it wasn't over yet. Melissa's lawyer made it clear they'd fight for full or joint custody, claiming Melissa was working toward rehabilitation and that her family would support her throughout. I knew then that this battle was far from finished. Melissa's parents would pour every dollar they had into restoring her image, trying to convince the court that she deserved a second chance with our kids. After the hearing, as we were leaving the courthouse, Melissa approached me. "Ethan, please," she said, her voice softer, almost pleading. "I'm getting better. I miss the kids. Don't take them away from me." I held her gaze, feeling nothing but anger and disappointment. "You made that choice when you decided you didn't care about them, Melissa," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Now you'll have to live with it." Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought I saw real regret. But then, just as quickly, her expression turned cold. She gave a slight nod and walked away, her parents close behind. Outside, Megan patted my shoulder. "You did well in there, Ethan. But this is just the beginning. We'll keep gathering evidence, stay one step ahead. Don't let your guard down." I nodded, appreciating her support. As I drove home, I replayed the judge's words in my mind, the weight of what lay ahead settling over me. This wasn't just about winning a case. This was a fight to protect my kids from a mother who'd already shown how little she valued them, and I'd go through whatever it took to make sure they'd never have to question where they stood in my life. With temporary custody settled, a new routine began. I poured everything I had into creating a home where Hope and Luke could feel secure and loved. After what they'd been through, they needed more than just stability, they needed reassurance, a sense that life would go on without any more upheaval. The first thing I did was move our family's bedroom out of the master suite and into one of the smaller rooms down the hall. I couldn't stand the thought of sleeping in the same space where Melissa had betrayed me. Instead, I set up a new space with fresh paint, soft lighting, and new furniture, creating a peaceful environment where the kids and I could unwind at the end of each day. Every evening became our time to reconnect. We'd gather around the dinner table, sharing stories, laughter, and sometimes a few tears. Hope would tell me about her day at school, all the little details that seemed trivial but somehow brought a warmth back to our lives. Luke, still too young to understand the full scope of what had happened, would ask when Mom would come back. Each time, I'd explain as simply as I could, "Mom needs some time to work on herself, buddy. But I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." At night, I made a habit of reading them a bedtime story, making sure to stay until they drifted off. It was in these small routines that I found a sense of purpose again, a way to put the pieces back together. They were my world now, and every choice I made revolved around giving them the life they deserved. Claire, my boss, had noticed the change in my work and checked in on me often. She'd give me time to make adjustments, bring the kids to work if I had to, and even arranged for an office daycare program. Her support went beyond professional courtesy, it was genuine, and I started to realize just how much I could rely on her. One afternoon, she invited me into her office. "Ethan, I've been thinking, maybe you should take a few extra days off," she suggested, her tone gentle but firm. "Focus on settling things with the kids." "Thank you, Claire," I replied, grateful but feeling a little lost. "It's hard to even think straight these days." She nodded. "That's understandable. You're carrying a lot on your shoulders. Don't hesitate to lean on those around you. People are here to help." There was a kindness in her eyes that gave me a sense of relief, a reminder that I didn't have to navigate all of this alone. Taking her advice, I began to open up a bit more. My neighbor, a retired teacher, started helping out with after-school activities for Hope and Luke. Friends I hadn't heard from in years called to check in. Slowly, the isolation began to ease. One evening, as we sat together in our new bedroom, Hope looked up at me. "Daddy, are we going to be okay?" she asked, her little voice filled with worry beyond her years. I wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. "Yes, sweetheart. We're going to be just fine. I promise you that." In that moment, I realized that despite all the pain, we were rebuilding something stronger. With every story, every laugh, every quiet moment spent together, we were piecing our family back together, creating a new foundation that no one could take from us. As the days passed, I found strength I didn't know I had. I knew the road ahead was still long, especially with Melissa and her family determined to regain their influence. But no matter what lay ahead, I'd be ready. The life I was building now wasn't just for me, it was for my kids. And I'd protect it fiercely, no matter the cost. Just when I thought things were settling down, a letter arrived from Melissa's lawyer. It was a request for expanded visitation, claiming she'd made significant progress, and was ready to be more involved in the kids' lives. I could feel my blood pressure spike as I read it. She'd been out of our lives for barely a month, and already she was pushing to get back in, trying to force herself into the lives of the children she'd all but abandoned. I immediately called Megan, reading her the letter and venting my frustrations. "Ethan," she said, her voice calm but firm, "this is common. Don't let it shake you. The courts will want proof that she's stable, sober, and capable of taking on even supervised visitation." "Proof?" I muttered, still feeling the anger simmer beneath the surface. "She thinks she can just walk back in and pretend none of it happened." Megan sighed. "Look, I know it's frustrating. But we can use this as an opportunity to show that she's not ready, that her involvement would disrupt the progress you've made with the kids." We prepared our response, requesting that Melissa provide documented evidence of her supposed progress, any rehab records, therapy notes, and evidence of a stable living situation. Megan explained that this would hold Melissa accountable and would be a clear reminder to the court of the damage she'd done. Meanwhile, I kept the kids in their routine, trying to shield them from any hint of this looming battle. Hope had adjusted well, she seemed to trust that I would be there for her, and it showed in her growing confidence. Luke was a bit more withdrawn, missing his mother in ways he couldn't quite express. It hurt to see him sad, but I knew it was better than letting her come and go from his life, stirring up chaos every time she reappeared. A week later, I got an unexpected visit from Jessica, the officer who'd helped me on the night I'd found Melissa. She'd become a friend, stopping by to check in on me and the kids now and then. This time, she had more than just a friendly drop-in on her mind. "Ethan," she said, looking serious, "I've heard through the grapevine that Melissa's trying to angle her way back into your lives. She's been making a lot of noise about how she's changed, how she's working hard to make things right. But from what I've seen, it's mostly talk. I shook my head, unsurprised but exhausted by the thought of Melissa trying to play the victim. She's really trying to act like the wronged party here, isn't she? Jessica gave a dry smile. People like her usually do. But I thought you should know, I spoke to a few officers who've seen her around town. She's been out with some of the same people she used to hang with. Doesn't look like she's changed much at all. This news, though disheartening, was exactly what I needed to hear. I thanked Jessica, feeling grateful for her looking out for us. Knowing Melissa was still out there, refusing to take responsibility while trying to worm her way back into our lives, only strengthened my resolve. The following week, we faced Melissa in court again, this time for the hearing on her request for expanded visitation. She looked put together on the surface, but I could see through her act. Her lawyer argued that Melissa had turned over a new leaf, that she was doing everything to be a good mother and deserved to be back in her children's lives. When Megan presented the request for documented proof of her progress, Melissa's lawyer floundered. They hadn't anticipated that we'd be prepared, that we'd demand real evidence. Melissa's only response was that she was working on herself, and her lawyer offered nothing substantial in return. The judge looked unimpressed. After listening to both sides, he denied her request for expanded visitation, ordering that she comply fully with the initial custody agreement. The relief washed over me, though I knew it wouldn't be the last we'd see of her attempts. As we left the courthouse, I looked over at Megan, feeling both exhausted and grateful. Thank you for everything. I don't know what I'd do without your support. She gave me a reassuring smile. You're a good father, Ethan. You're fighting for your kids. And as long as you keep doing that, you'll keep winning. Back home, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. No matter how hard Melissa fought, I would stand my ground. The kids and I were building a life without her, and nothing she did would take that from us. With Melissa's latest attempt at custody blocked, life settled back into a new rhythm. My focus returned to the kids and to making our home a sanctuary where they felt safe and loved. But even as I found comfort in our little family, I couldn't ignore how exhausted I was. Between work, the custody fight, and raising Hope and Luke on my own, every day felt like a marathon. Claire, my boss, noticed how worn down I was, and one day she brought me a cup of coffee and sat down beside me in the break room. Ethan, she began gently, you're handling so much on your own. I don't know how you're doing it. I shrugged, managing a tired smile. Not like I have a choice, right? She nodded, her expression thoughtful. Well, I want you to know you're not alone. You're a great dad, and it's okay to lean on people. Don't forget, I'm here for you too. Claire's support had been a lifeline since this ordeal began, and her words brought me a kind of relief I hadn't felt in a long time. It had been ages since I felt that kind of warmth from anyone outside my kids. Just having someone who understood, someone willing to listen, reminded me that I wasn't facing all of this entirely alone. That evening, after tucking the kids in, I found myself thinking about Claire's kindness, the way she'd quietly stepped up for me over the last few months. She'd never pried, never judged, only offered her steady presence. Maybe, I thought, there was room for friendship in my life again. As weeks passed, our friendship grew. Claire would drop by my office with coffee, and we'd share stories, mostly about work but sometimes about life outside of it too. She'd ask about the kids, telling me stories about her own niece and nephew, and there was a gentleness in her that felt like a balm to my worn-out soul. I hadn't let myself rely on anyone in years, and the realization that I could trust her made me feel a sense of stability I didn't realize I'd been missing. One Friday evening, she invited me to dinner, just as friends. I hesitated for a moment, worried about leaving the kids, but then I realized how much I needed a break. I arranged for a sitter, and we went to a quiet little restaurant downtown. For the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to relax. Over a couple of glasses of wine, Claire and I talked about everything, her work, her family, even her past relationships. She was candid, open in a way I hadn't seen before. And when I told her about my marriage to Melissa, she listened without judgment, her eyes reflecting nothing but compassion. I hadn't told anyone some of the things I shared that night, but with Claire, it felt natural. "It's a lot to carry," she said softly, after I'd told her everything. "I'm sorry you've had to go through it alone, Ethan. But I hope you know you don't have to anymore." Her words hit me in a way I hadn't expected. For so long, I'd felt like a solitary figure, bearing the weight of my broken marriage and shattered family on my shoulders. But here was someone willing to share that weight, if only for a little while. As the evening wore on, I found myself laughing, really laughing, in a way I hadn't in years. For a few hours, the stress and pain faded, replaced by the simple joy of good company. Claire brought a lightness back into my life, a reminder that there was still happiness to be found, even after so much had been lost. When we parted that night, she hugged me warmly. "Take care, Ethan," she said, her voice soft. "And remember, I'm just a call away." Driving home, I realized that a part of me had started to heal. There were still challenges ahead. Melissa wasn't going to disappear from our lives that easily, and the custody battle was far from over. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel entirely alone. I had my kids, a job that gave me purpose, and now, a friend who cared enough to stand beside me. Life wasn't perfect, but it was better. And for now, that was more than enough. Months passed, and life with Hope and Luke started to settle into a steady rhythm. Melissa's presence had become a shadow in the background, her attempts to regain access to the kids growing less frequent as her appeals hit the same dead ends. With each passing day, I could feel the grip she once held on our lives weakening. And slowly, quietly, I felt something changing within me too. Through all the turmoil, Claire had been there, a constant support. What had started as simple kindness from my boss grew into a deep friendship, one that filled spaces I hadn't even realized were empty. She'd helped me with the kids, giving me the confidence to ask for help, to recognize that being strong didn't mean facing everything alone. One evening, she came over for dinner. I'd invited her to join us after Hope had insisted she needed to meet Aunt Claire, and Claire hadn't hesitated to accept. As she walked through the door, carrying a small bouquet of flowers for Hope and a set of toy cars for Luke, I realized just how much her presence had come to mean to all of us. Over dinner, Claire fell into the rhythm of our little family as if she'd always been there. She laughed with Hope, answering every one of her endless questions with a patience and warmth that made my heart ache in a good way. Luke, normally shy around new people, found himself smiling as she helped him color his picture of a dinosaur world. After we tucked the kids in, Claire and I sat in the quiet living room, sharing the comfortable silence of two people who'd seen each other through hard times. I looked over at her, my thoughts swirling. I'd told myself I'd keep a wall up, that I'd focus solely on my kids and rebuilding our lives. But with Claire, that wall had come down so gradually I hadn't even noticed. "Thank you for everything, Claire," I said, my voice a little softer than I'd intended. "You didn't have to be here, but you are. I don't know how I would have made it through without you." She smiled, her eyes warm. "You're stronger than you know, Ethan. But everyone needs someone to lean on sometimes. You deserve that too." The silence that followed felt charged, like we were both aware of something new, something just beneath the surface. I hesitated, caught between wanting to hold on to this friendship and realizing it had become so much more. Finally, I reached over, taking her hand in mine. She looked up at me, a mix of surprise and warmth in her expression, and I could feel something shift between us. "Claire," I started, struggling to find the words. "I don't know what comes next, but I'd like it to be with you, if you feel the same." She didn't pull away. Instead, she tightened her grip, a smile breaking across her face that lit up her whole expression. "Ethan," she whispered, "I've been here for you, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I'd love to be part of your future. Yours, and the kids, if you'll have me." Hearing those words was like coming home after a long, cold journey. There was no more pretending, no more hiding behind excuses. For the first time since everything had fallen apart, I could see a future that felt full, hopeful, and real. In the weeks that followed, Claire became an even more natural part of our lives. She spent weekends with us, helping Hope with her school projects, playing with Luke in the backyard, sharing breakfasts and Sunday movie nights. The kids took to her immediately, and with each passing day, the scars of the past began to heal. They knew now that family wasn't defined by blood alone but by who showed up for you, who stayed when it mattered most. One night, while we were watching the kids play in the yard, Claire turned to me, a twinkle in her eye. "You know, I think we're pretty lucky, all things considered," she said with a grin. "Yeah," I agreed, squeezing her hand. "We really are." Life had thrown everything it could at me, but here I was, standing stronger than before, with someone by my side who made me believe in second chances. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't looking over my shoulder, worried about the past. I was looking ahead, ready to build something new, something better, for myself, for my kids, and now, for us. We'd been through the fire, but somehow, we'd come out of it whole. And as the sun set on that quiet, simple evening, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace.